Marcus Tate sprawled bloodied on the cold floor of a Harrow Pines jail cell, his once crisp suit shredded, crimson streaks staining the concrete. Corrupt cops laughed outside, their boots echoing as they mocked his broken body. Beaten but defiant, he whispered a phone number through swollen lips, a lifeline clutched in his mind. What began as a simple drive home had spiraled into a nightmare, threatening his life, his family, and a conspiracy he couldn't yet fathom. That number wasn't just hope, it was a weapon. Who could he call to topple this chaos? Before we dive into this wild tale, let me know where you're watching from today. If you stand for justice and exposing corruption, hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping stories that pull back the curtain on America's darkest corners. Stick around, because this is just the beginning. Marcus Tate gripped the leather steering wheel of his midnight blue Cadillac, the hum of the engine, a steady pulse beneath his fingertips as he cruised through the quiet back roads of Harrow Pines, Georgia. The clock on the dashboard glowed 11:37, its soft green light cutting through the darkness that swallowed the rural highway. He'd just left a late-night meeting in Atlanta, pitching a multi-million-dollar condo project to a room full of investors who'd hung on his every word. At 45, Marcus had carved a name for himself as one of the sharpest architects in the Southeast, his tailored charcoal suit and polished demeanor commanding respect in boardrooms across the state. Tonight, though, exhaustion tugged at his edges, his eyes flicking to the GPS, promising a shortcut home through this nowhere town. The road stretched empty before him, flanked by gnarled pines that loomed like silent sentinels, their shadows dancing in the headlights. He adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his own tired face, the faint lines etched by years of late nights and relentless ambition. A flicker of red and blue snapped him alert. His stomach tightened as a police cruiser materialized. Behind him, its lights stabbing through the night. Marcus exhaled slow and deliberate, hands shifting to 10 and 2 on the wheel, every muscle in his body tensing with a familiar dread he'd learned to bury deep. He signaled right, easing the Cadillac onto the gravel shoulder, the crunch of dirt under tires loud in the stillness. The cruiser pulled up tight behind him, its spotlight flooding the car with harsh white glare. Two officers stepped out, their silhouettes sharp against the beam. Officer Wade Burris, broad-shouldered with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, led the way, his boots kicking up dust as he approached the driver's side. Officer Kyle Tatum followed, slimmer, younger, with a twitchy energy that set Marcus's nerves on edge. Both wore the patched uniforms of Harrow Pines PD, their badges glinting like cheap trophies under the moonlight. Marcus rolled down his window, the cool night air brushing his face as Burris leaned in close, his breath sour with stale coffee. "License and registration," the officer barked, his voice rough as gravel, no trace of courtesy in it. Marcus kept his tone even, professional, the way he'd trained himself since he was old enough to drive. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Burris's lips curled into a smirk, his gray eyes narrowing as he took in Marcus's suit, the gleam of his watch, the shine of the Cadillac. "Plate lights out," he said, the lie so blatant it almost dared Marcus to call it out. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he complied, moving slow and deliberate, hands visible, knowing one wrong twitch could turn this bad fast. The gravel bit into his polished loafers as he stood, 6 feet of quiet defiance against the officers. Looming presence. Tatum circled the car, his flashlight bouncing off the bumper, the license plate glowing clear and bright in the beam. "Looks fine to me," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady, his eyes locked on Burris. The officer's smirk widened, a predator sizing up prey. "You calling me a liar, boy?" The word hit like a slap, dripping with venom, stripping away Marcus's years of hard-earned respect in a single syllable. Before he could answer, Tatum popped the trunk with a crowbar, the metal screeching in protest. Marcus's heart thudded hard against his ribs. "That's illegal," he said, stepping forward, but Burris shoved him back, meaty palms slamming into his chest. "Stay put," he growled as Tatum rummaged inside, tossing Marcus's briefcase onto the dirt like trash. Seconds stretched into eternity, the night pressing in thick and heavy. Then Tatum straightened, holding up a small plastic bag, white powder glinting inside like a cruel joke. "Well, well," he said, his voice high with mock surprise. "What do we got here?" Marcus's blood ran cold, his mind racing to catch up with the impossibility of it. "That's not mine," he said, firm and clear, but Burris was already moving, yanking Marcus's arms behind his back. Cold steel cuffs snapped shut around his wrists, biting into his skin as Tatum chuckled. "Low. Sure it ain't hotshot. Bet you thought you could roll through our town with this junk, huh?" The slur slipped out casual, ugly, a knife twisted in Marcus's gut. "You people always think you're above the law," Burris added, shoving him toward the cruiser, his grip bruising through the suit jacket. Marcus stumbled, gravel scraping his knees, but he kept his head up, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. "I know my rights," he said, voice cutting through their laughter. "You've got no probable cause for that. Search." Burris spun him around, slamming him against the cruiser's hood, the metal hot against his cheek despite the night chill. "Probable cause?" the officer mocked, leaning in so close Marcus could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You were swerving all over the road. Dangerous driver like you, we had to check. Lucky we did, or this poison might have hit our streets." The lie was lazy, brazen, but Marcus saw the truth in their eyes. They didn't care about evidence or law. This was a game, and he was the prize. Tatum rifled through Marcus's wallet, pulling out his architect's business card, holding it up like a trophy. "Fancy man from Atlanta," he sneered, tossing it into the dirt. "Think you're big city? Money keeps you safe here. This ain't your world." Burris tightened the cuffs until Marcus felt the sting of blood welling under the metal, then shoved him into the back seat of the cruiser. The door slammed shut, locking him in with the stale stink of sweat and fear that clung to the vinyl. Through the smeared window, he watched them high-five, their silhouettes blurring into one monstrous shape against the Cadillac's headlights. The engine roared to life, and the cruiser lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as they peeled off, toward town. Marcus's mind spun, piecing together the setup. The drugs weren't a fluke. They'd been waiting for someone like him, someone black, someone successful, someone who didn't belong in their warped little kingdom. His phone sat heavy in his pocket, unreachable with his hands bound, but he clung to the number burned into his memory, the one he'd whispered in that cell hours later. Julian, his brother, the US Attorney General. These small-time thugs had no idea who they'd just snared, but Marcus did. He forced his breathing steady, his pulse slowing despite the ache in his wrists, the humiliation searing his chest. The cruiser rolled past a faded sign, "Welcome to Harrow Pines, population 12,000," its letters peeling like old skin. The town unfolded in glimpses, sagging porches, shuttered stores, a gas station with a single pump flickering in the dark. Faces peered from windows, pale and curious, then vanished behind curtains as if they'd seen this play out before. Marcus's gut twisted with the certainty that they had. This wasn't just a stop. It was a ritual, a trap honed over years, and he was its latest catch. Burris glanced back through the rearview mirror, his smirk a promise of worse to come. "Better get comfy," he said, voice thick with glee. "You're gonna love our hospitality." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't respond. He stared out at the passing pines, their branches clawing at the sky, and let his mind sharpen. They thought they'd broken him already, thought his silence was surrender. They were wrong. Every word they'd spat, every smug laugh, every lie they'd stacked against him, fueled the fire building in his core. He wasn't just some nobody they could bury. He was Marcus Tate, and he had a lifeline they couldn't touch. Not yet. The cruiser turned onto a potholed street, the precinct's squat brick silhouette looming ahead, its windows black as empty eyes. Whatever came next, Marcus vowed he'd outlast it. He had to. The Harrow Pines precinct swallowed Marcus Tate whole as officers Wade Burris and Kyle Tatum hauled him through its rusted double doors, the air inside thick with the sour tang of bleach and despair. His wrists throbbed beneath the cuffs, blood crusting where the metal had chewed into his skin, but he kept his spine straight, his hazel eyes scanning the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. The booking room, was a claustrophobic box of chipped paint and buzzing static, a scratched desk dominating the center, where a hulking figure waited. Sheriff Amos Holt rose slow and deliberate, his 6'4" frame casting a shadow that stretched across the warped linoleum floor. Grey stubble clung to his jaw like moss on a rotting log, and his uniform strained against a belly fed by years of unchallenged power. His muddy brown eyes locked onto Marcus, glinting with something dark and hungry, a wolf sizing up a stray lamb. "Another big shot rolling through my town," Holt drawled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room. He plucked Marcus's wallet from Burris's hand, flipping it open to study the ID with exaggerated care. Marcus Tate, architect, Atlanta address, fancy. The word dripped with mockery, his lips twisting as he tossed the wallet onto the desk like it was trash. Marcus squared his shoulders, refusing to shrink under the sheriff's gaze. "I'd like my phone call," he said, his tone clipped but unwavering, the kind he used to shut down pushy contractors. Holt's laugh boomed, a harsh bark that echoed off the concrete walls. "Phone call? Boy, you don't get how this works yet, do you?" The slur landed heavy, a brick meant to crush Marcus's dignity, but he didn't flinch. Burris shoved Marcus into a metal chair, its legs scraping the floor with a screech that set his teeth on edge. Tatum leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips, as Holt pulled a thick file from a drawer, slamming it down with a thud. "Let's see who we got here," the sheriff said, flipping it open to reveal a stack of papers that couldn't possibly be real. Marcus caught glimpses of grainy photos, typed reports, dates stretching back years. "Marcus Tate," Holt read, aloud, his voice mock-serious. "Arrested in Savannah 2019, possession with intent. Macon 2022, assault on an officer. Looks like you're a regular troublemaker." Marcus's pulse spiked, disbelief warring with fury. "That's fabricated," he said, leaning forward, voice sharp as a blade. "I've never been arrested in my life. Check the records." Holt's grin widened, yellowed teeth flashing like a warning. "These are the records, son, and they say you're a menace." He slid a pre-typed confession across the desk, the ink still wet from a printer churning out lies. "Sign this. Admit to the drugs we found, and maybe you'll see daylight before." "You're 50. Marcus stared at the paper, his mind racing. This wasn't just a frame-up, it was a system, polished and precise, designed to bury people like him. Black men who dared to climb too high, who drove nice cars, who wore suits instead of shame. He pushed the confession back with a steady hand. "I'm not signing anything," he said, locking eyes with Holt. "You've got no evidence, no grounds. This is illegal." The sheriff's face darkened, a storm cloud rolling in. He lunged across the desk, fist slamming into Marcus's jaw with a crack that snapped his head back. Pain exploded behind his eyes, blood pooling in his mouth. But he swallowed it down, glaring up at Holt through watering vision. "You'll sign when I say you sign," Holt snarled, towering over him, knuckles red from the blow. Burris chuckled low, a sound that crawled under Marcus's skin, while Tatum tapped his baton against his palm, itching to join in. Marcus wiped his lip with the back of his hand, the smear of crimson stark against his skin, and forced his voice steady. "You're making a mistake," he said, tasting iron. "A big one." Holt straightened, brushing off his hands like he'd swatted a fly. "Mistake's yours, thinking you're special," he said, turning to a filing cabinet and pulling out a clipboard. He muttered something to Burris about processing, but Marcus's ears caught a stray phrase as the sheriff flipped through pages. "Quota week's almost up. This one's a good catch." The words hit like a jolt, slotting into place with the planted drugs, the fake rap sheet, the speed of this nightmare. Quota week. This wasn't random profiling. It was a machine, a calculated grind that chewed up outsiders and spat out profits. Marcus's chest tightened, not with fear but with a cold growing clarity. They weren't just after him. They were hunting trophies to fill some sick tally. Burris yanked him to his feet, dragging him toward a hallway lined with dented lockers and a flickering exit sign. "Time to get you comfy," he said, his grip bruising Marcus's arm through the torn sleeve of his suit. Tatum followed, whistling, a tuneless melody that grated on Marcus's nerves, the sound bouncing off the narrow walls. They passed a bulletin board pinned with faded mugshots, All black faces, all strangers who'd likely sat in that same chair, faced that same file. Marcus memorized Holt's slip about quotas, tucking it into the mental arsenal he was building. His phone call might be denied now, but he had a name, a number, a lifeline they couldn't erase. Julian Tate. His brother. The man who could burn this place to the ground. The hall opened into a cramped holding area, a row of cells with rusted bars and stained concrete floors. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting jagged shadows as Burris shoved Marcus into the nearest cage. The door clanged. Shut, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in his bones. Holt loomed outside, hands on his hips, his bulk filling the frame. "Sleep tight," he said, his voice a taunt. "We'll talk more tomorrow. Maybe you'll feel like signing then." He turned away, barking orders at Tatum about logging the hall, leaving Marcus alone in the dimness. The sheriff's boots faded down the hall, replaced by the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the dark. Marcus sank onto the metal bench bolted to the wall, his jaw pulsing with every heartbeat, his suit a ruin of dirt and blood. He closed his eyes, replaying Holt's words, the quota hint, the fake file. This wasn't just corruption, it was a factory, churning out victims with assembly line precision. He'd walked into a trap meant to crush him, to erase everything he'd built, all because of the color of his skin and the shine of his success. But they didn't know who they'd snagged. Not yet. His lips moved silently, tracing Julian's number, a promise he'd cash in soon. For now he'd wait, watch, and endure. Because when this broke open, Harrow Pines wouldn't see it coming. So, what do you think, folks? Comment number 1 if you're raging at how these cops can twist lies into chains just because Marcus dared to succeed while black. Drop a like if you're rooting for him to turn their game upside down. And if you want to see justice hit these bigots like a freight train, subscribe now because this story's about to explode. Tell me, how far would you go to fight a system stacked against you? Speaking of fighting, what happens when Marcus demands his rights in a den of wolves? Stick around to find out. The air in the Harrow Pines precinct hung heavy with the stench of mildew and desperation as Marcus Tate sat in his cell, the cold metal bench digging into his spine. His jaw ached from Sheriff Amos Holt's earlier punch, a dull throb pulsing, in time with his heartbeat, but his mind stayed razor-sharp, replaying the quota slip he'd overheard. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the drip of that unseen pipe and the occasional shuffle of boots beyond the bars. His torn suit clung to his skin, damp with sweat and blood, a stark contrast to the polished architect who'd driven into this hellhole. The precinct hummed with late-night lethargy, officers muttering about shift changes, their voices a low drone that lulled the building into a false calm. A new sound cut through the haze, soft footsteps, hesitant, unlike the heavy tread of Burris or Tatum. Marcus's eyes flicked to the cell door as a slim figure emerged from the shadows, her uniform crisp but her face etched with unease. Officer Lena Price couldn't have been more than 25, her dark hair pulled tight in a bun, her brown eyes darting nervously down the hall. She clutched a burner phone in her trembling hand, its cheap plastic glinting under the dim bulb. "You don't have much time," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she slid the device through the bars. "I've seen too many disappear. In here. Men like you gone without a trace." Marcus's pulse quickened, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. He took the phone, his fingers brushing hers, and nodded once, a silent pact sealed in that fleeting touch. He dialed fast, the number etched into his memory since childhood, each beep a lifeline pulling him from the abyss. The line crackled, then cleared, and a familiar voice answered, deep and steady. "Julian Tate." Marcus kept his tone low, urgent, glancing at the hall where Lena stood watch. "It's me, Jules. I'm in Harrow Pines, Georgia. Cops pulled me over, planted. Drugs beat me, faked a record. They're denying my rights. It's a setup bigger than just me." Julian's breath hitched, a rare crack in his steel composure. But when he spoke, it was all authority, the U.S. Attorney General rising to the fight. "Stay alive, Marcus. I'm sending the feds. This ends now." The call lasted 30 seconds, but it was enough. Marcus slipped the phone back to Lena, who pocketed it with a tight nod before vanishing into the dark. Relief surged through him, a fleeting warmth against the cell's chill. Julian's power could crush this backwater racket. Marcus could almost taste freedom. He leaned against the wall, letting his bruised body rest, imagining Holt's smug face when the FBI stormed in. But the quiet shattered with a bellowed curse from the hall. Wade Burris barreled into view, his buzz-cut head gleaming with sweat, his grey eyes wild with fury. "Who the hell let you call?" he roared, snatching the bars as if he could rip them apart. Marcus's stomach dropped, realizing Lena hadn't been fast enough. Burris's meaty fist shot through, grabbing the collar of Marcus's ruined suit, yanking him forward until his face slammed into the metal. Pain flared white-hot across his cheekbone, but he clenched his jaw, silent. "You think you're slick?" Burris snarled, his breath hot and rancid. He reached into Marcus's pocket, fishing out nothing, then spun to the desk where Lena had lingered. His boot kicked over a chair, and there it was, the burner phone, dropped in her haste. Burris snatched it up, smashing it against the wall with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. Plastic shards rained down as he turned back, his fury a living thing. "You're done," he said, unlocking the cell with a jangle of keys. Marcus braced himself, but Burris didn't strike again. Instead, he dragged him down the hall past the booking room into a narrower corridor that reeked of mold and rust. The walls closed in, the air growing colder, until they reached a solitary cell, a concrete coffin with no windows, no light, save a sliver creeping under the door. Burris shoved him inside, the force sending Marcus sprawling onto the gritty floor. His knees hit hard, splitting skin through his torn pants, but he caught himself, hands splayed against the damp stone. The door slammed shut, the lock grinding into place, plunging him into near darkness. "Enjoy your new digs," Burris called. Through the slot, his voice thick with venom. "Let's see how tough you are now." Footsteps retreated, leaving Marcus alone with the echo of his own breathing, the drip of water somewhere in the void. He pushed to his feet, wincing as his body screamed, and felt along the walls, finding nothing but slime and despair. Just when he thought the punishment was isolation, a gloved hand slid through the slot, dropping a rusted shank onto the floor with a dull clang. Marcus froze, staring at the jagged blade, its edges stained with something dark and old. Burris's laugh filtered back, low and cruel. "Found that on you when we booked you," he lied loud enough for anyone listening to hear. "Tried to cut me with it, didn't you? Assaulting an officer. Bad move, hotshot." The slot snapped shut, and Marcus's blood ran cold. This wasn't just retaliation, it was a death sentence, a setup to justify whatever came next. They'd claim he'd attacked Burris, give them cause to bury him deeper, maybe kill him and call it self-defense. He sank back against the wall, the shank glinting in the faint light like a taunt. His call to Julian had been a win, a crack in their armor, but they'd struck back twice as hard, turning his lifeline into a noose. The precinct's machine hummed louder now, its gears grinding to erase him. Lena's risk had bought him a moment, but Burris's rage had turned it to ash. Marcus's fingers traced the number in his mind again, clinging to it like a prayer. Julian was coming, but how long could he hold out in this tomb? The walls seemed to pulse, closing in with every breath, and he knew this was only the beginning. His thoughts spun to the quota-week Holt had let slip, the fake rap sheet, the planted drugs. This wasn't a fluke arrest, it was a hunt, and he was the prey they'd chosen to break. Black, successful, an outsider in their warped fiefdom, he was the perfect target for their twisted tally. Burris's frame-up with the shank was a desperate escalation, proof they feared what he might do, who he might reach. Marcus wiped blood from his split lip, tasting defiance beneath the copper. They thought they'd silenced him, locked him away where no one could hear. They were wrong. Julian's voice echoed in his head, a promise of fire and reckoning. The solitary cell pressed down, its silence a weight, but Marcus forced his mind to work, to plan. He'd memorized the precinct's layout, the faces, the voices. Lena's. Courage had given him a glimpse of weakness in their ranks, a crack he could widen. Burris's tantrum meant they were rattled, sloppy. Marcus shifted, his bruised body protesting, and crouched by the shank, studying it without touching. Evidence if he could use it right. His call had lit a fuse, and even now, somewhere out there, Julian was moving, the feds closing in. He just had to survive long enough to see it burn. The drip of water counted the seconds, a slow heartbeat in the dark, and Marcus steeled himself for the next blow, knowing it would come harder, meaner, uglier than before. Marcus Tate shivered in the solitary cell's suffocating dark, the damp concrete leaching cold into his bones as the rusted shank gleamed like a curse in the sliver of light beneath the door. His breath fogged in the stale air, each exhale a quiet defiance against the Harrow Pines precinct's attempt to break him. The ache from Sheriff Amos Holt's punch lingered in his jaw, joined now by fresh bruises from Officer Wade Burris's rage. But Marcus's mind churned hotter than ever, piecing together the trap tightening around him. The shank wasn't just a threat, it was a pivot, a lie to bury him deeper than the planted drugs ever could. Footsteps thudded closer, heavy and deliberate, and the door screeched open, flooding the cell with harsh light that stung his eyes. Burris loomed in the frame, his buzz-cut silhouette a wall of menace, but it was the man behind him who froze Marcus's blood. District Attorney Victor Pruitt, all slicked hair and shark-sharp grin, his tailored suit a stark insult to the precinct's grime. Marcus Tate, say, Pruitt said, his voice smooth as oil, rolling the name like he savored its weight. You've been busy? Assaulting an officer with that little toy? He nodded at the shank, still untouched on the floor, his green eyes glinting with calculated malice. Marcus pushed to his feet, ignoring the stab of pain in his knees, and met Pruitt's gaze head-on. You know that's a lie, he said, his tone steady despite the blood crusting his lip. No prints, no witnesses, no truth. You're framing me again. Pruitt's laugh was a soft hiss chilling the air. Truth's what we make it, he said, stepping closer, his polished loafers clicking on the stone. And right now, you're a cop killer in the making. Burris cracked his knuckles, a grin splitting his face, as Pruitt pulled a tablet from under his arm, tapping it to life. The screen flickered, showing a report. Attempted murder of Officer Wade Burris, Harrow, Pines PD with a concealed weapon. Marcus's stomach lurched as Pruitt scrolled, revealing a fabricated timeline, a signed affidavit from Tatum claiming he'd seen Marcus lunge with the shank. This goes to Judge Carver in an hour, Pruitt said, his smile widening. No bail, straight to trial. You'll be lucky to see sunlight again. Marcus's fists clenched, the cuffs long gone but their sting still raw. My brother's coming, he said, voice low and lethal. You can't bury this. Pruitt's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease breaking his polish, but he waved. It off. Your brother? Some big shot who'll cry foul? Too late, Tate. We own this town. They hauled him out, Burris's grip bruising his arm as they marched him through the precinct's maze, past cells where hollow-eyed men watched in silence, their faces etched with the same despair Marcus refused to wear. The booking room buzzed. With new energy, a clerk typing furiously as Holt barked orders from his desk. They shoved Marcus into a van, its interior reeking of rust and sweat, and sped through Harrow Pines' empty streets, the town's sagging houses blurring into a grey smear. The courthouse loomed ahead, a squat brick relic with cracked steps, and a Confederate flag drooping in the muggy dawn. Inside, Judge Elton Carver waited, his bald head gleaming under the courtroom's flickering lights, his black robe hanging loose on a wiry frame. His watery blue eyes flicked over Marcus with distaste, a sneer curling his lip as Pruitt laid out the charges. Attempted murder, Pruitt said, pacing before the bench, his voice rising for the handful of spectators, locals who nodded like they'd seen this play before. This man attacked Officer Burris with a deadly weapon, a clear threat to our community. Marcus stood in the dock, his torn suit a badge of their brutality, and spoke clear and firm. That's a fabrication. I've been framed from the start, targeted because I'm black, because I don't fit their script. I demand my counsel and a fair hearing. Carver's gavel slammed down, cutting him off, the sound a gunshot in the stale air. Enough, the judge snapped. Bail denied. Trial set for tomorrow. You'll learn respect here. The ruling hit like a brick, but Marcus caught a flash outside, a news van, its camera rolling, a reporter scribbling fast. His story was leaking, a crack in their wall. Pruitt wasn't done. As Marcus was led out, he saw the DA slip the reporter a wad of cash, whispering low. Hours later, chained in a holding cell beneath the courthouse, Marcus glimpsed the fallout on a guard's phone. Drug lord caught in. Harrow Pines, a tax cop in custody. The headline screamed lies, painting him as a kingpin gone rogue, his face plastered across the screen, a mugshot he didn't remember being taken. His heart sank, the brief hope of exposure snuffed out by Pruitt's bribe. They'd turned his defiance into a caricature, a monster for the town to hate. The guard smirked, pocketing the phone. "You're famous now," he said, leaving Marcus in the dimness, the cell's bars pressing in like a cage for a beast he'd never been. A rumble outside broke the silence, tires on gravel, voices sharp, with authority. Marcus peered through the tiny window, spotting black SUVs pulling up, their doors emblazoned with FBI. Julian's team, finally here. His chest loosened, a breath he'd held too long slipping free. They'd dig into the precinct, find the truth, pull him out. But Pruitt's shadow loomed larger now, his counterattack ruthless. The tampered evidence logs Julian's agents would need were already shredded, Holt's clerk seen earlier tossing files into a furnace. The Shanks chain of custody, doctored with Tatum's prints scrubbed and Marcus's somehow added. The machine wasn't just fighting back, it was rewriting reality, stacking the deck so high even the feds might falter. Marcus, slumped against the wall, the concrete rough against his torn jacket, his mind racing. His call to Julian had been a win, a flare shot into the night. But Pruitt and Holt had turned it into a war. The news smear, the rushed trial, the faked evidence, it was a tidal wave meant to drown him before help arrived. He thought of the quota week, the fake rap sheet, the Shank all threads in a tapestry of hate woven to erase men like him, black men who dared to rise. His victory had rattled them, but their retaliation was a sledgehammer, smashing his hope into shards. Julian's SUVs were a lifeline, but how much could they salvage from this wreckage? What do you say, folks? Comment number 1 if you think Marcus deserves justice after this disgusting frame-up just for being a successful black man. Hit that like button if you're sick of seeing corrupt DAs like Pruitt twist the truth for their own gain. And if you're ready to watch this racist system get torn apart, subscribe now, because Marcus's fight is heating up. Tell me, would you trust a judge like Carver with your fate, or is he just another cog in their dirty machine? Speaking of machines, what happens when the feds step in but the villains strike back even harder? You'll see next time. The holding cell beneath the Harrow Pines courthouse was a tomb of shadow and silence, its thick walls muffling the distant hum of Julian's FBI team outside. Marcus Tate sat on the edge of a rusted cot, his torn suit stiff with dried blood, his bruised hands resting on his knees as he fought the exhaustion tugging at his edges. The news smear still burned in his mind, Pruitt's fabricated headline twisting his life into a lie, but the sight of those black SUVs had sparked a flicker of hope. He could hear the faint crackle of radios beyond the bars, a promise of rescue. Inching closer, the air shifted, heavy with a new tension, as shouts erupted down the hall, sharp and chaotic, followed by the clang of metal on metal. Marcus stood, his pulse kicking up, every nerve alert as the sounds grew louder, nearer, a storm breaking loose. The cell block door burst open, and 3 inmates stormed in, their orange jumpsuits stained with sweat, their faces twisted with purpose. The leader, a hulking man with a shaved head and a jagged scar slicing his cheek, locked eyes with Marcus, his grin a slash of menace. "Tate," he growled, his voice thick with venom. "Sheriff Holt sends his regards." Marcus's gut clenched, recognizing the setup instantly. These weren't random prisoners, they were hired muscle, bribed to silence him before the feds could dig too deep. The second inmate, wiry with a patchy beard, cracked his knuckles while the third, a squat figure with a lazy eye, hefted a makeshift club carved from a broom handle. The bars rattled as they forced the lock, a guard's absence screaming complicity. Instinct took over. Marcus snatched the cot's loose leg, wrenching it free with a groan of metal, and swung just as Scarface charged. The steel caught the man's shoulder, sending him staggering with a howl. But the wiry one lunged, fists flying. Marcus ducked, the blow grazing his temple, and drove the leg into the attacker's gut. doubling him over with a wheeze. The club came next, whistling through the air, and Marcus rolled, the wood splintering against the wall inches from his head. Adrenaline surged, his architect's precision turning to survival, every move calculated despite the ache screaming. Tore through his body. He grabbed the fallen broom handle, spinning it like a staff, and cracked it across Lazy Eye's knee, dropping him with a scream. Scarface roared back, tackling Marcus into the bars, the impact jarring his spine, but Marcus twisted free, slamming the handle into the man's jaw with a sickening crunch. The fight ended as fast as it began, the three sprawled groaning on the concrete, blood pooling beneath Scarface's face. Marcus stood panting, the broom handle slick in his grip, his chest heaving with triumph. He'd won, beaten their assassins, proven he wouldn't break. He dropped the weapon, wiping sweat from his brow, and leaned against the wall, catching his breath. The cell block fell silent, the chaos swallowed by an eerie stillness until heavy boots thundered closer. Sheriff Amos Holt burst in, his bulk filling the doorway, his muddy eyes blazing with fury. Behind him, Officer Kyle Tatum held a grainy camcorder, its red light blinking like an accusation. "You son of a bitch," Holt spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You just killed a man." Marcus's victory curdled in his throat as he followed Holt's gaze. Lazy Eye lay motionless, a pool of crimson spreading from his head, the club beside him now a murder weapon. "That's not possible," Marcus said, his voice hoarse, stepping back. "He was alive, groaning seconds ago." Holt's grin was a predator's, slow and vicious. "Not what the tape says," he replied, nodding to Tatum, who rewound the footage and played it loud. The grainy screen showed Marcus swinging the handle, but the angle cut off Lazy Eye's fall, jumping to a still of his lifeless body, blood artfully staged. "Inmate riot," Holt said, his tone mock solemn. "You started it, killed him in cold blood, self-defense for us, murder for you." The precinct's machine roared to life, guards rushing in to cuff Marcus anew, their grips bruising as they dragged him from the cell. Holt led the charge, barking orders to lock down the block, his voice booming over the chaos. "Get this on the wire," he told Tatum, who smirked and bolted for the news van still parked outside. Marcus's mind raced, piecing together the lie. They'd staged the death, turned his survival into a noose, and now they'd broadcast it to bury him deeper than the shank ever could. The feds were close, but this was Holt's counterattack, a sledgehammer to smash Marcus's hope before Julian could strike. They shoved him into an interrogation room, its single bulb swinging overhead, casting jagged shadows across the peeling paint. Holt loomed over him, slamming a meaty fist on the table, the sound a gunshot in the cramped space. "You're done, Tate," he said, his breath hot with tobacco. "Murder charge sticks, and your fancy brother can't save you now." Marcus glared up, his hazel eyes burning through the pain. "You rigged this," he said, voice steady despite the cuffs cutting his wrists. "Killed your own pawn to pin it on me. How many others have you buried like this?" Holt's face twitched, a crack in his mask, but he leaned closer, whispering low. "Enough to keep this town mine, you're just another number." The door slammed as he stormed out, leaving Marcus with the hum of the bulb and the weight of a lie he couldn't shake. Minutes later, the guard's radio crackled, a news anchor's voice cutting through. "Breaking Harrow Pines inmate riot. Ends in murder. Suspect Marcus Tate already facing drug and assault charges, now linked to a brutal killing." Marcus's chest tightened, the smear from Pruitt's bribe now a wildfire, his name a curse on every tongue. Holt's escalation wasn't just ruthless, it was a masterstroke, turning Marcus's defiance into a death sentence. He'd survived. The attack thought he'd won, but they'd flipped the board, painting him a monster for the world to hate. The feds might unravel the drugs, the shank, but this was a body, a tape, a story too loud to silence. The final blow came softer, a whisper through the precinct's walls. Marcus overheard a clerk muttering to Tatum about cleaning up. Loose ends, followed by a call to torch the Cadillac. His car, his alibi, the proof he'd been a law-abiding man on a quiet drive, was gone, burned to ash in some backlot. Holt's machine didn't just frame him, it erased him, stripping every shred of truth he could cling to. The SUVs outside were his lifeline, Julian's promise, but the riot had bought the villain's time, a bloody distraction to outpace the feds. Marcus sank into the chair, his bruised hands flexing, his mind a storm of rage and resolve. He'd beaten their assassins, but they'd struck back with a lie so big it threatened to crush him. How long could he hold out against a town that thrived on his ruin? The interrogation room in the Harrow Pines precinct buzzed with the hum of a dying bulb, its weak light flickering over Marcus Tate's bruised face as he sat cuffed to a steel table. The fabricated murder charge from the staged riot hung over him like a guillotine, Sheriff Amos Holt's doctored footage looping in his mind, turning his survival into a death sentence. His torn suit was a rag now, soaked with sweat and blood, but his hazel eyes burned with a fire that refused to gutter out. The precinct's walls trembled with new noise, tires screeching outside, boots pounding gravel, voices sharp with federal authority. Marcus's lips twitched, a faint hope stirring as the door flew open, slamming against the concrete with a bang that jolted the guard napping in the corner. Agent Carla Ruiz strode in, her FBI windbreaker crisp against the precinct's filth, her dark eyes slicing through the room like a blade. "Marcus Tate," she said, her voice clipped and commanding, badge flashing as she uncuffed him with swift precision. "You're coming with us." Behind her, a dozen agents swarmed the precinct, their shouts drowning out Holt's bellowed protests from the booking room. Marcus rubbed his wrists, the raw skin stinging, and stood tall, his 6-foot frame unsteady but unbroken. Ruiz guided him out, past desks where officers scrambled to hide files, their panic a palpable stench. The main room was chaos. Burris's buzz-cut head ducked low as agents pinned him against a wall, his wrists snapping into cuffs of his own, while Tatum bolted for the back exit, only to crash into a waiting Fed. Holt roared from his office, slamming a fist into his desk, but his muddy eyes widened as Ruiz tossed a warrant onto the clutter. "Federal investigation," she said, her tone ice-cold. "Step aside, Sheriff, or join your boys in lockup." They dragged Burris into an interview room, his swagger gone, sweat beading on his brow as Ruiz leaned across the table, her voice low and lethal. "Talk," she said, sliding a photo of the planted drugs from Marcus's Cadillac under his nose. "Who ordered this?" Burris's jaw worked, his grey eyes darting, and then he cracked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Holt, it's always Holt. Quota week," he said. "Needed a big fish, someone black, someone rich. Tate fit the bill." Marcus watched through a one-way glass, his chest tightening as the truth spilled out, a lifeline pulled from the wreckage. Ruiz pressed harder, and Burris spilled more. The shank, the faked rap sheet, all Holt's playbook. "He runs this town like a damn king," Burris muttered, head dropping. "We just follow orders." The feds moved fast, seizing computers, rifling through cabinets, hauling out boxes of files that smelled of smoke and lies. Marcus stepped into the dawn outside, the muggy Georgia air kissing his battered skin as a clerk processed his emergency bail. Freedom hit like a punch, the precinct's grip loosening, Julian's promise finally breaking through. He squinted at the horizon, where news vans clustered like vultures, their cameras rolling. But the headlines still screamed Holt's murder lie, Pruitt's smear holding firm. Ruiz clapped his shoulder, her guarded nod a silent vow. "We've got enough to start," she said. "Holt's going down." Marcus exhaled, tasting victory, a jagged edge of relief after days of hell. His brother's power had shifted the tide, and he was out, alive, unbroken. But the precinct's shadow stretched longer than he'd thought. As Ruiz briefed her team, Marcus caught a flicker of movement. Holt slipping into a side office, his bulk disappearing behind a locked door. The sheriff emerged minutes later, his face a mask of calm too perfect to trust, and Marcus's gut twisted. Hours passed, the feds digging deeper, until a call crackled through Ruiz's radio, her expression hardening as she listened. "Atlanta PD," she said, turning to Marcus, her voice tight. "Your wife, Naomi, she's gone, taken from your home 30 minutes ago." A note had been left on the kitchen counter, scrawled in Holt's jagged hand. "Confess everything. Tate, or she dies slow." Marcus's knees buckled, the air sucked from his lungs, freedom turning to ash in his mouth. The precinct's machine hadn't just bent under the federal push, it had struck back with claws bared, ripping into Marcus's life where it hurt most. Naomi, his rock, his partner of 15 years, snatched from their sleek Atlanta condo. Her laughter silenced by Holt's vengeance. Ruiz barked orders, agents scrambling to trace the call. But Marcus knew the truth. This was personal now, a war beyond files and warrants. Holt's empire was cracking, Burris's confession a chink in its armor. But the sheriff had doubled down, wielding Marcus's family like a blade. The feds had freed him, given him a win. But Holt's counterattack was a gut shot, a promise of pain that dwarfed the riot's lie. Marcus's hands shook, not with fear but with rage, his mind flashing to Naomi's warm brown eyes, her voice telling him to fight. He followed Ruiz to an SUV, gravel crunching under his torn loafers as she briefed him on the fly. "We've got Burris locked down. Holt's under watch, but he's slippery," she said, her jaw tight. "This kidnapping's a desperation play. We'll find her." Marcus nodded, his voice a low growl. "He's not slipping through this. Not after Naomi." The precinct faded behind them, its brick bulk a fortress of hate. But Marcus's victory felt hollow, the bail papers in his pocket meaningless against the void where Naomi should be. Holt had lost a pawn in Burris, but he'd traded up, turning Marcus's relief into terror. The feds were here, the truth was out, but the sheriff's retaliation had raised the stakes to a razor's edge. Julian's team could dismantle the racket, but could they outrun Holt's wrath? Marcus stared out the tinted window, Harrow Pines' sagging houses blurring past, each one a silent witness to the town's rot. Holt's note burned in his mind, a taunt that fueled his resolve. He'd walked out of that cell, thought he'd won, but the villains had flipped the script, dragging Naomi into their mire. The feds had the drugs, the shank, the confession, but Holt had Naomi, and that trumped everything. Marcus's fists clenched, nails biting his palms, the architect's calm shattering into a warrior's fury. He'd survived the stop, the beating, the riot, but this was different. This was his heart bleeding out somewhere in Holt's grip, and he'd tear this town apart to get her back. What's your take, folks? Comment number 1 if you're screaming for Holt to pay for snatching Naomi just to keep his corrupt throne. Smash that like button if you think Marcus deserves to walk free after Burris spilled the truth. And if you're itching to see this racist machine crumble under federal heat, subscribe now, because this fight's going nuclear. Tell me, could you stay calm if your loved one was stolen by a monster like Holt, or would you burn it all down? Speaking of burning, what happens when Marcus risks everything to save Naomi from Holt's claws? Buckle up for the next twist. The black FBI SUV tore through the back roads of Harrow Pines, its engine growling as Agent Carla Ruiz gripped the wheel, her sharp eyes fixed on the winding asphalt ahead. Marcus Tate sat shotgun, his torn suit a shredded testament to his ordeal, his bruised hands clenched tight enough to whiten his knuckles. Sheriff Amos Holt's note seared his mind. "Confess everything, Tate, or she dies slow." Naomi, his wife, his anchor, snatched from their Atlanta home, was now a pawn in Holt's desperate game. The precinct's raid had cracked his empire, Burris's confession peeling back its lies, but Holt had struck back, turning Marcus's fleeting freedom into a nightmare. Ruiz's radio crackled, Julian's voice cutting through. "We've traced a burner call to an old mill 10 miles out. Teams en route." Marcus's chest tightened, a mix of dread and fury churning as he nodded. "Get me there," he said, his voice a low growl. The mill loomed in the dusk, a rotting skeleton of brick and steel, its broken windows gaping like wounds against the Georgia sky. FBI agents fanned out, their boots silent on the overgrown lot, rifles glinting as they took positions. Ruiz signaled Marcus to stay back, but he shook his head, his hazel eyes blazing. "She's my wife," he said, slipping from the SUV, every muscle coiled for the fight. He'd survived the stop, the beating, the riot. He wouldn't lose Naomi to Holt's spite. The mill's rusted doors creaked as he crept inside, the air thick with dust and the tang of oil, shadows stretching long across splintered floors. A muffled cry pierced the silence, Naomi's voice, and Marcus's heart lurched, guiding him deeper into the maze. He found her in a back room, bound to a chair, her dark curls matted with sweat, her warm brown eyes wide with fear. 2 of Holt's lackeys stood guard, their faces unfamiliar but their intent clear, hired guns to tighten the noose. Marcus moved like a ghost, snatching a loose pipe from the floor, its cold weight steady in his grip. He swung hard, cracking the first thug's skull with a wet thud, dropping him before the second could react. The second lunged, a knife flashing, but Marcus sidestepped, driving the pipe into the man's gut, then his jaw, sending him sprawling in a heap. Naomi's gasp broke the stillness as he cut her ropes with the fallen knife, pulling her into his arms. "I've got you," he whispered, her trembling frame pressed against his battered chest. They bolted, weaving through the mill's crumbling halls, the FBI's shouts echoing closer as Ruiz's team breached the perimeter. Gunfire erupted outside, Holt's men clashing with agents, bullets pinging off steel beams as Marcus shielded Naomi, his body a wall against the chaos. They burst into the open, Ruiz waving them to an SUV as agents pinned down the last of the resistance. The mill faded behind them, its silhouette swallowed by the night, and Marcus held Naomi tight, her sobs soaking his ruined shirt. She was safe, his daring rescue a triumph snatched from Holt's clutches, a win that felt like breathing again after days underwater. Ruiz climbed in, her face grim but victorious. "We've got 3 in custody," she said. "Holt's losing pawns fast." Marcus nodded, relief flooding him, believing the worst was over. But Holt's shadow stretched further than the mill. Back at a safe house 30 miles out, Marcus washed the blood from his hands, Naomi resting upstairs under federal watch, when Ruiz's phone buzzed with a new horror. "Check the news," she said, her voice tight, thrusting a tablet into his hands. The screen blazed with a headline, "Marcus Tate confesses to drug ring, cop assault and murder." A video played, grainy but damning. Marcus, beaten and dazed in the precinct days ago, his voice slurring under duress. "I did it all, the drugs, the shank, the riot." Holt's men had recorded it during the beating, held it back like a trump card, and now Pruitt had aired it, twisting Marcus's coerced words into a public execution. Naomi's rescue faded to ash as Marcus stared, his victory gutted by this vicious lie. The safe house walls closed in, the hum of the AC a mockery of the storm raging inside him. Ruiz cursed, slamming her fist on the table. "They doctored it," she said, her dark eyes flashing. "We'll prove it, but this buys them time." Marcus's hands shook, rage boiling over as he paced, the architect's calm shattered by Holt's unrelenting war. He'd saved Naomi, thought he'd won, but the villains had flipped the board again, turning his defiance into a confession for the world to swallow. The feds had the mill, the thugs, Burris's truth, but this video was a sledgehammer, smashing his name deeper into the mud. Holt wasn't just fighting to win, he was fighting to erase Marcus entirely. Pruitt's next blow landed softer, but cut deeper. A courier dropped a lawsuit at the safe house door, its pages crisp with legal venom. Marcus Tate sued for defamation by Harrow Pines PD, Sheriff Amos Holt, and DA Victor Pruitt. The claim twisted the knife, alleging Marcus's baseless accusations of corruption had ruined their reputations, seeking millions in damages. Ruiz scoffed, tossing the papers aside, but Marcus saw the play, a legal quagmire to tie him up, drain his resources, keep him buried while Holt regrouped. The mill rescue had freed Naomi, but Holt's counterattack was a hydra, sprouting new heads to choke Marcus's fleeting triumph. His wife was safe, but his life, his name, his fight all teetered on a razor's edge. Marcus sank into a chair, the safe house's sterile walls a flimsy shield against the storm outside. Naomi's voice drifted down, soft and steady, a lifeline he clung to, but the video looped in his head, a ghost of his own defeat. Holt had lost Naomi as leverage, but he'd traded up, weaponizing Marcus's coerced words and the law itself to crush him. The feds could raid, arrest, dig, but this was a war of perception now, and Holt held the megaphone. Marcus's fists clenched, nails biting his palms, the rage a furnace in his core. He'd stormed the mill, beaten the odds, but Holt's machine roared louder, its gears grinding to trap him in a cage of lies. How long could he fight a town that thrived on his ruin, when every win birthed a worse nightmare? The Harrow Pines courtroom buzzed with a restless hum as Marcus Tate stood in the dock, his torn suit replaced by a borrowed grey jacket that hung loose on his battered frame. The air stank of old wood and sweat, the gallery packed with locals. whispering behind calloused hands, their eyes glinting with a mix of disdain and glee. Naomi sat in the front row, safe now but pale, her warm brown eyes locked on Marcus, a silent anchor in the storm. Judge Elton Carver loomed on the bench, his bald head slick under the flickering lights, his watery blue eyes narrowing as he shuffled papers stained with Holt's lies. Marcus faced trial for the staged riot, murder, the doctored footage, from Sheriff Amos Holt playing on a screen beside the jury, his own coerced swings twisted into a killer's rage. District Attorney Victor Pruitt paced before the bench, his slicked hair gleaming, his sharp grin slicing through the room as he spun the tale of Marcus as a violent thug. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pruitt said, his voice smooth and venomous, gesturing to the screen where Marcus's broom handle cracked a skull in grainy loops. "This man started a riot, murdered an inmate in cold blood, all to cover his drug empire. A menace who attacked our officers, our town." Marcus's fists clenched behind the rail, his bruised knuckles whitening, but he kept his voice steady when called. "That's a lie," he said, facing the jury, 6 pale faces staring back with suspicion. "They set me up, bribed those inmates to kill me, staged the death. I'm a victim, targeted because I'm black, because I dared succeed where they didn't expect me to." Pruitt smirked, waving off the words, but a murmur rippled through the crowd, a crack in their certainty. The courtroom doors slammed open, a gust of muggy air sweeping in as Julian Tate strode through. His tailored suit a stark contrast to the town's decay, his 6'2" frame radiating the U.S. Attorney General's authority. Behind him, Agent Carla Ruiz flanked a cuffed Wade Burris, his buzz-cut head bowed, his gray eyes darting like a trapped rat. The gallery hushed, Carver's gavel hovering mid-air as Julian took the stand, his deep voice cutting through the silence. "Your Honor, we have evidence," he said, holding up a tablet streaming live from the precinct raid. "Officer Burris's testimony recorded this morning." The screen flickered, Burris's hoarse whisper filling the room. Holt ordered. The riot paid those inmates to silence Tate. The death was staged, bodies swapped after. All to frame him. Gasps erupted, Pruitt's grin faltering as Julian pressed on. "The drugs, the shank, the rap sheet, all fabricated. This is systemic corruption, and it ends here." Marcus's chest loosened, a breath he'd held for days, slipping free as the jury shifted, their faces softening with doubt. Carver's sneer twisted, his hand tightening on the gavel, but Julian wasn't done. He played audio from the mill raid, Holt's lackeys confessing to Naomi's kidnapping, tying the sheriff to every thread. "Dismiss the charges," Julian demanded, his gaze locking with Carver's, "or face federal warrants for your bench." The judge's watery eyes flickered, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple, and after a tense beat, he banged the gavel. "Case dismissed," he muttered, voice cracking. "Defendant released." Marcus exhaled, relief crashing over him like a wave, Naomi's smile a beacon as he stepped free, the cuffs falling away. Victory, hard-won and sweet, pulsed through him. But Holt's machine didn't sleep. As Marcus hugged Naomi outside, the courthouse steps trembling under their feet, a deafening boom split the air. Smoke billowed from the parking lot, Julian's black SUV erupting in flames, glass and steel raining down as screams pierced the dusk. Marcus shielded Naomi, his heart slamming against his ribs, spotting Julian staggering from the chaos, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, but alive. Ruiz barked orders, agents swarming the wreckage, her voice cutting through the panic. "Bomb, Holt's crew!" The sheriff's retaliation landed like a thunderclap, a near-lethal strike to bury the Fed's push. Marcus's win dissolved into ash, the dismissal a hollow prize against this brutal escalation. Holt wasn't just fighting, he was waging war. The chaos thickened as night fell, Harrow Pines' streets glowing with the fire's aftermath, sirens wailing like mourners. Marcus stood with Naomi, her hand tight in his, when Ruiz's radio crackled again, a deputy's voice trembling. "Sheriff's boys torched Tate's house in Atlanta. Total loss." The words hit harder than the bomb, Marcus's vision blurring as he pictured their sleek condo, years of memories, Naomi's paintings, all reduced to cinders. Holt's allies had struck again, a racist mob unleashed to erase. His life, their message scrawled in soot. No victory went unpunished. The courtroom triumph, Julian's evidence, the dismissal, all shredded by this double blow. Holt's wrath a hydra that grew fiercer with every cut. Marcus's knees buckled, but Naomi held him up, her strength a lifeline as Ruiz rallied her team. "We're locking this down," she said, her dark eyes blazing. "Holt's exposed, desperate, we'll nail him." Marcus nodded, his voice a rasp. "He's not stopping, not until I'm gone." The charges were dropped, his name cleared. In law, but Holt's machine roared louder, its gears grinding to crush him beyond the courtroom. The bomb, the arson, they were declarations. Marcus could win battles, but the war was Holt's to wage. His hazel eyes hardened, rage overtaking relief, the architect's mind plotting through the ruin. Julian limped over, his suit singed, his resolve unbroken. "We're not done," he said, clapping Marcus's shoulder, "but they've raised the stakes. What's your verdict, folks?" Comment number 1 if you're cheering Marcus's courtroom win against these corrupt snakes who'd frame him for breathing while black. Smash that like button if you think Holt's bomb and arson prove he's a coward, scared of real justice. And if you're ready to see this fight explode past the courtroom, subscribe now because Marcus's war is just heating up. Tell me, would you risk everything to save your brother like Julian did, or is Holt's revenge too vile to outrun? Speaking of revenge, what happens when Marcus uncovers the puppet master, pulling Holt's strings? Get ready for the next shock. The night air in Harrow Pines reeked of charred metal and gasoline. The smoldering wreckage of Julian Tate's SUV, a grim monument to Sheriff Amos Holt's wrath. Marcus Tate stood beside his brother, the U.S. Attorney General, his borrowed grey jacket streaked with soot, his hazel eyes reflecting the dying flames as sirens wailed in the distance. Naomi clung to his arm, her dark curls damp with sweat, her warm brown eyes darting at every shadow after the courtroom wind turned to ash with Holt's bomb and the torching of their Atlanta home. Agent Carla Ruiz barked orders to her FBI team, her windbreaker flapping as she coordinated the chaos. But Marcus's mind churned, piecing together the shards of Holt's relentless war. The charges were dropped, Naomi was safe, yet the sheriff's machine roared louder, its claws sinking deeper into their lives. Julian wiped blood from the gash on his forehead, his tailored suit singed but his voice steady as he pulled Marcus aside. "This isn't just Holt," he said, his deep tone cutting through the clamor. "The precinct logs, Burris's confession, they point higher. I've got analysts digging and it's big." Marcus's pulse quickened. The quota weak, the planted drugs, the staged riot all snapping into a larger frame. Ruiz joined them, her dark eyes glinting with grim triumph as she thrust a laptop into Julian's hands. "Found this in Pruitt's office," she said, tapping the screen alive. "Encrypted files, but we cracked them. Harrow Pines feeds a private prison empire run by Senator Roy Grayson. Quotas, targets, profits, all mapped out." Marcus stared. At spreadsheets detailing arrest goals, racial profiles, asset seizures, a blueprint of corruption stretching across Georgia. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Holt was a cog, Pruitt a gear, but Grayson was the engine, a silver-haired titan. In the state senate, his public charm masking a racket that turned black lives into dollars, Marcus's fists clenched, the architect's precision channeling into fury as he traced the lines linking Harrow Pines to a dozen other towns, each a trap for outsiders like him. "He's untouchable," Marcus muttered, but Julian's jaw tightened, his resolve steel. "Not anymore," he said. "We're raiding his mansion tonight. You're with us." Ruiz nodded, her team already piling into SUVs, and Marcus followed, Naomi staying back under guard, her whispered, "Be careful," a lifeline he tucked close. The drive to Grayson's estate cut through moonlit fields, the air thick with tension, as Marcus gripped a borrowed vest, his bruised body aching but unbowed. Grayson's mansion sprawled across a hill, its white columns gleaming like a plantation reborn, a fortress of wealth built on blood. Ruiz's team breached the gates, flashlights slicing through the dark as alarms wailed, guards scattering under federal shouts. Marcus moved with them, his loafers silent on marble floors, adrenaline drowning the pain of his wounds. They hit, Grayson's office, a cavern of oak and leather, and tore it apart, seizing hard drives, shredding locked drawers to reveal ledgers of payoffs, prison contracts, and coded emails. Grayson himself stood cornered, his silver hair disheveled, his tailored suit rumpled as he sneered at Julian. "You've got nothing," he spat, but Marcus held up a file, his voice cold. "This says otherwise. Hundreds of lives ruined for your bottom line." The senator's smirk faltered, the Empire's guts laid bare, and Marcus felt the wind sharp and real, a crack in the machine's hull. They hauled Grayson out, his wrists cuffed, his curses echoing as agents boxed evidence, under floodlights. Marcus exhaled, the weight of uncovering this network a fleeting triumph. A dagger plunged into the heart of Holt's puppet master. Julian clapped his shoulder, his singed suit a badge of their fight. "This ends it," he said, and Marcus believed it, the file's a map to dismantle Grayson's web. But the victory shattered with a blaring news chopper overhead, its spotlight bathing them in harsh white. Ruiz's radio crackled, a deputy's voice frantic. "Grayson's on every channel, claiming Tate bombed your car, Julian, nationwide. Manhunt issued." Marcus's stomach dropped, the broadcast flashing his mugshot, now branded a terrorist, evidence forged to pin the courthouse blast on him. Holt's machine hadn't cracked. It had roared back, Grayson's allies in play, turning Marcus's raid into a noose. The senator smirked from the SUV, his cuffs a prop as he whispered to a guard, his influence unbroken. Ruiz cursed, slamming, her fist on a hood. "They've got fake witnesses, doctored footage," she said, her voice tight. "Holt's crew planted it before we hit." Marcus's mind raced, the files in their hands a smoking gun. But the manhunt was a tsunami, drowning his win in lies. Grayson's counterattack escalated beyond the bomb, beyond the arson, a nationwide frame-up that painted Marcus as America's enemy. The feds had the truth, but the public had the lie, and it spread like wildfire. The final blow landed as Ruiz's team scrambled to secure Grayson. A black van screeched from the shadows, disgorging 4 masked hitmen, their silenced pistols, spitting rounds into the night. Marcus dove behind a column, bullets chipping marble as agents returned fire, the air exploding with chaos. Grayson's hired killers moved with precision, their aim locked on Marcus, a contract to bury him before the files could talk. Ruiz tackled him down, her vest taking a slug meant for his chest, her grunt of pain a jolt to his core. The feds dropped 2 assassins, the others fleeing into the dark, but the message was clear. Grayson's empire wouldn't fall quietly. Marcus's triumph, the raid's success, was a spark snuffed by this lethal strike, turning him from victor to fugitive in a heartbeat. He crouched beside Ruiz, her breathing ragged but steady, the mansion's grandeur a mockery of the blood pooling on its steps. Julian dragged Grayson from the SUV, his face a mask of fury, as he shoved the senator against a wall. "Call them off," he growled, but Grayson laughed, a hollow sound. "Too late, Tate, you're the hunted now." The chopper's light held them pinned, news feeds screaming Marcus's name, the manhunt a net tightening across the state. The files were gold, the network exposed, but Holt and Grayson had flipped the board, their retaliation a death warrant that dwarfed the riot, the bomb, the arson. Marcus's victory was real, but it had birthed a nightmare, his life now a target. So in a game he'd only begun to grasp. How long could he outrun a lie this big, when every step forward drew more blood? The night swallowed Marcus Tate as he crouched behind a crumbling wall in Atlanta's underbelly, the city's neon glow a distant smear against the sky. Grayson's mansion raid had exposed a statewide prison racket, but Senator Roy Grayson's frame-up had turned Marcus into a fugitive, his face plastered across every news screen as the bomber of Julian's SUV. His borrowed vest hung heavy with sweat, and Ruiz's blood, her near death from the hitman a raw wound in his chest. Sirens wailed through the streets, a manhunt tightening its noose, but Marcus moved fast, his bruised body fueled by rage and desperation. Naomi was safe with feds in a bunker, but Julian's voice crackled through a stolen burner phone, urgent and strained. "They've got me pinned at the field office," he said. "Stay low, Marcus, help's coming." A shadow shifted nearby, and Marcus tensed, his hazel eyes catching a familiar figure, Officer Lena Price, the rookie who'd slipped him a phone in Harrow Pines. Her uniform was gone, traded for a hoodie and jeans, her brown eyes wide with resolve as she pressed a backpack into his hands. "Food, cash, a gun," she whispered, glancing at the alleys twisting around them. "I'm done with Holt's crew. Blew the whistle to the feds. You've got allies, Tate." Marcus nodded, a flicker of trust cutting through his isolation, and slung the pack over his shoulder. Lena's whistleblowing had fueled the raid, and now she was his lifeline, a rogue spark in the dark. "Get out of sight," he said, and she vanished into the maze, her footsteps fading as he bolted deeper into the slums. He found a derelict warehouse, its broken windows gaping like eyes, and slipped inside, the air thick with dust and rot. The burner buzzed again, Julian's voice sharper now. "Grayson's files are online," he said. "Lena's leaks too. Public's rioting, demanding answers." Marcus powered up a cracked laptop from the pack, the screen flickering to life with news feeds. Crowds torching effigies of Grayson, protests swarming Harrow Pines, his name trending as a symbol of resistance. The truth was out, a wildfire he'd sparked, and for a moment victory surged through him, the architect's vision bending a nation's gaze. He typed fast, uploading more files from the raid, each click a brick in Holt's downfall, Grayson's empire crumbling under the weight of its own filth. The public had turned, his win a beacon piercing the manhunt's lies, but Grayson's machine struck back with fangs bared. The warehouse door exploded inward, splintering wood as 4 masked hitmen stormed in, their silenced pistols spitting death. Marcus dove behind a rusted crate, bullets shredding the air, his heart slamming as he fumbled the gun from Lena's pack. He returned fire, the recoil jarring his bruised hands, dropping one assassin with a shot to the chest, blood blooming dark on the concrete. The others fanned out, their steps silent, predatory, and Marcus scrambled, weaving through the maze of debris, his breath ragged. A second killer loomed, blade flashing, but Marcus rolled, firing twice, the man collapsing with a gurgle. The last 2 pinned him, rounds pinging off steel, and he ran, bursting through a shattered window into the night, glass cutting his arms. As he hit the pavement running, he zigzagged through alleys, the hitmen's boots pounding behind, their silencers whispering death inches from his heels. Lena's gun saved him, but the clip was near empty, and Atlanta's streets turned hostile. Cop lights flashing at every corner, the manhunter net he couldn't shake. He ducked into a storm drain, its dank tunnel swallowing him, the roar of water masking his gasps as he waited, the killer's shadows passing overhead. The chase paused, his lungs burning, the truth's viral spread a hollow win against this relentless hunt. He'd turned the tide, thought he'd won, but Grayson's assassins were a scourge, proving the Empire's reach stretched beyond Holt, beyond Harrow Pines, into every dark corner he could flee. The burner buzzed again, Julian's voice a lifeline, fraying fast. "Marcus, they've got me," he said, static crackling as shouts erupted in the background. "Field office breached, Grayson's hitmen." The line cut, replaced by a live stream popping up on the laptop, hacked into by some Fed ally. Julian, bound in a chair, blood streaking his singed suit, a masked figure pressing a gun to his temple. The feed cut to a demand, cold and clear. Marcus Tate surrenders, or the Attorney General dies live. Marcus's knees buckled, the tunnel spinning as his brother's life dangled by a thread, Holt's machine twisting his victory into a ransom worse than Naomi's. The public rioted. For him, but Grayson's retaliation was a guillotine, severing his hope with surgical precision. The blow deepened as the laptop flickered with breaking news. Harrow Pines precinct bombed, whistleblower Lena Price dead in blast. Marcus's breath caught, the grainy footage showing the precinct's brick husk engulfed in flames. Lena's whistleblowing silenced in a fireball Holt's crew pinned on him. The hitmen, the kidnapping, now this. A triple strike that dwarfed the mansion raid, the arson, the courtroom bomb. Grayson's empire didn't just fight back, it erased every ally, every truth, leaving Marcus a lone ghost in a war he'd sparked. His gun trembled in his hand, 2 bullets left. The tunnel's damp walls closing in as sirens wailed closer, the manhunt tightening with Julian's life and Lena's death on his shoulders. Marcus slumped against the drain's slime, his mind, a storm of rage and grief, the architect's calm drowned by a brother's terror and a friend's sacrifice. The files were out, the public enraged, but Grayson's counterattack was a tidal wave, washing away his win with blood and ruin. Julian's capture, live-streamed for the world, was a gut punch, Holt's desperation morphing into a spectacle to break him. Lena's death was a knife twist, her courage snuffed to frame him further. The precinct blast a lie so big it buried the truth under rubble. He'd evaded the hitmen, turned the nation's eyes, but the cost was staggering, every step forward, dragging him deeper into their mire. How long could he run when the empire struck at his soul, leaving him hunted by both law and assassins? The storm drain's dank chill seeped into Marcus Tate's bones as he crouched in its shadows. The stolen burner phone trembling in his hand, Julian's tortured image burned into his retinas from the live stream. Grayson's hitmen had his brother, the U.S. Attorney General, bound and bleeding, their demand echoing, "Surrender or watch him die." Lena's death in the precinct blast, pinned on Marcus, tightened the manhunt's noose, Atlanta's streets alive with sirens and chopper blades, slicing the night. His borrowed vest was slick with sweat, 2 bullets left in Lena's gun, but Marcus's hazel eyes blazed with a fury that drowned his exhaustion. Naomi was safe, the public rioted with his truth, but Julian's life hung by a thread, and Marcus wouldn't let Holt's machine claim another piece of him. He traced the livestream signal, a faint ping from Grayson's private airfield 10 miles out, and moved, a ghost fueled by vengeance. The airfield sprawled under a moonless sky, its tarmac glinting with the sleek hulls of private jets, a fortress of wealth Senator Roy Grayson wielded like a shield. Marcus slipped through the perimeter, his torn loafers silent on the grass, dodging floodlights as armed mercenaries patrolled with rifles slung low. The live stream flickered on his burner, Julian's bloodied face a beacon pulling him closer. The hitmen's taunts a goad he turned into steel. He spotted the hangar, its steel doors ajar, and crept inside, the air thick with jet fuel and menace. Julian sat bound in the center, his singed suit soaked red, a masked figure pressing a pistol to his temple, 3 others pacing with automatic weapons, their laughter a sick chorus. Marcus's chest tightened, but his architect's mind mapped. The space, fuel drums, rafters, a wrench on a workbench, every detail a weapon. He struck fast, snatching the wrench and hurling it at the nearest mercenary, the steel cracking the man's skull with a wet thud, dropping him lifeless. The others spun, rifles barking, but Marcus dove behind a drum, bullets sparking off metal as he fired his last 2 shots, one grazing a hitman's arm, the other shattering a knee. Pain flared in his side, a slug clipping his ribs, but he rolled, grabbing the fallen rifle, its weight steady in his bruised hands. He sprayed rounds, dropping the kneecapped man with a scream, the hangar erupting in chaos as fuel drums ruptured, gasoline pooling under flickering lights. The masked leader roared, firing wild, but Marcus flanked him, slamming the rifle's butt into his jaw, sending the gun skittering as the man crumpled. Julian's bonds fell under Marcus's knife, his brother's groan a lifeline as they staggered back, the last hitman lunging with a blade. Marcus twisted, driving the rifle barrel into the man's gut, then his temple, the crack of bone ending the fight. He hauled Julian up, blood slicking their grip, and they stumbled toward the exit, the hangar's fumes choking the air. Grayson emerged from a jet's shadow, his silver hair wild, his tailored suit a mockery as he clapped slow and mocking. "Impressive, Tate," he said, his voice smooth venom, a pistol gleaming in his hand. "But you're too late." Marcus froze, Julian swaying beside him, as Grayson tossed a recorder onto the tarmac, his confession spilling out. "I built this empire. Holt's my dog. Every arrest $1. The senator smirked, aiming at Marcus. "Proof won't save." "You now!" Marcus lunged, shoving Julian behind a crate as Grayson fired, the bullet searing his shoulder, blood blooming hot and fast. He tackled the senator, fists pounding, the recorder skittering as they grappled, Grayson's pistol slipping free. Marcus pinned him, wrenching the gun up, its muzzle cold against Grayson's temple. "Call it off," he snarled, his voice a rasp of pain and rage, but Grayson laughed, a hollow sound. You think I'm the top? This is bigger than me. Sirens wailed closer, Ruiz's feds breaching the airfield, their shouts a lifeline, as Marcus held Grayson down, the confession, tape rolling, a total victory snatched from the jaws of death. Julian staggered up, clutching his side, and together they trapped the senator, his empire's guts spilling for the world to hear. The feds swarmed in, rifles raised, Ruiz's voice cutting through. Tate's clear. Secure Grayson. Agents cuffed the senator, his silver hair matted with sweat, his sneer fading as they boxed the recorder, evidence to bury him deep. Marcus leaned on Julian, blood dripping from his shoulder, the hangar's chaos fading as medics rushed in, their win, a blazing light against Holt's darkness. Grayson's confession was gold, the network's head severed, and Marcus felt the weight lift, his brother alive, the truth loud and unshakable. He'd stormed the airfield, beaten the odds, thought the war was won. The machine's spine snapped under his hands. But Grayson's machine had one last roar, a final blow to dwarf the chase, the bomb, the riot. A crackle split the night. Not gunfire, but a broadcast. Grayson's allies in DC hijacking every channel with a fake terror alert. Marcus Tate, domestic terrorist, orchestrates airfield attack, threatens national security. The chopper, overhead, blared it live, its spotlight pinning Marcus as military drones hummed on the horizon, a lockdown clamping down. Holt wasn't here, but his puppet masters were, twisting Marcus's triumph into a nightmare, branding him a threat to the nation. Ruiz cursed, her dark eyes wide as agents scrambled, the confession tape drowned by this lie so vast it swallowed cities. Grayson's smirk returned, faint but vicious as he was dragged away. You'll never outrun this, he whispered, and Marcus's victory turned brittle, the Fed's grip slipping against a tide of military might. Marcus sank to his knees, Julian beside him, the airfield a battlefield of truth and deceit, blood pooling beneath them both. He'd saved his brother, trapped Grayson, exposed the Empire, but the villain's counterattack was a leviathan, escalating beyond hitmen, beyond bombs, into a national frame-up that painted him a monster to millions. The drones circled, their red eyes glowing, the lockdown a cage no Fed could break. His shoulder throbbed, his side bled, but his mind raced, the architect plotting through the ruin. Holt's machine was broken, Grayson's voice its death knell, but this new lie was a beast he couldn't fight alone. How long could he stand when the Empire's masters turned the world against him, his win a spark lost in their storm? The Harrow Pines airfield trembled under the roar of military drones, their red eyes cutting through the night, as Marcus Tate knelt on the tarmac, blood seeping from his shoulder, his borrowed vest a ragged shield against the chaos. Julian Tate, slumped beside him, the U.S. Attorney General's singed suit soaked red, his breath ragged but his grip firm on Marcus's arm. Senator Roy Grayson's confession tape lay clutched in Agent Carla Ruiz's hands, its damning words a knife plunged into the heart of his private prison empire. Holt's machine laid bare. The feds swarmed, cuffing Grayson as his silver hair glinted under floodlights, his smirk a ghost of defiance despite the ruin. Marcus's victory burned bright, Grayson trapped, Julian saved, the truth unleashed. But the fake terror alert blared louder, branding him a national threat, military boots pounding closer, a lockdown sealing their fate. Ruiz barked orders, her dark eyes flashing as she shoved the tape into a secure case, her windbreaker flapping in the chopper-driven wind. "We've got Grayson," she shouted over the din, "and the files from his mansion. We're broadcasting this now." Marcus nodded, his hazel eyes hard despite the pain, and stumbled to a Fed van with Julian, its satellite uplink humming as texts patched into every network. The screen flickered, Grayson's voice spilling out, "I built this empire, Holt's my dog, every arrest $1." Protests flared on split feeds, crowds torching Harrow Pines streets, Atlanta's slums, a nation waking to the racket's filth. Julian's deep voice followed, raw but commanding. "This is your Attorney General. Marcus Tate's innocent, targeted by a corrupt network spanning Georgia. We've got proof. Stand down the alert." The broadcast hit like a shockwave, Grayson's empire collapsing, arrests flashing across states, Holt's precinct rats turning on each other. Marcus exhaled, the weight lifting as drones wavered overhead, their operators hesitating under the truth's glare. Ruiz's radio crackled, feds reporting mass surrenders, Pruitt in cuffs, Carver fleeing, Holt cornered in a safe house. The lockdown buckled, military pulling back as Julian's authority bent the tide, the terror lie crumbling. Under taped confessions and viral files, Naomi's face appeared on a secure line, her warm brown eyes wet with relief from the bunker, her voice a balm. "You did it, Marcus." He smiled, blood crusting his lip, the architect's vision reshaping a nation's justice. Holt's machine smashed, Grayson's web torn apart. Justice prevailed, a hard-won dawn breaking over the airfield's carnage, and Marcus felt the fight drain from his bones, victory a tangible thing after 12 parts of hell. But the shadows held one last twist, a betrayal sharper than any bomb or bullet. A figure stepped from the dispersing feds, his grey suit pristine, his silver hair combed back, his blue eyes cold with a mentor's familiarity. Victor Langston, ex-Attorney General, Julian's guide for decades, the man who'd shaped his rise, approached slow and deliberate, a pistol glinting in his hand. Marcus froze, recognition a gut punch as Langston's lips curled, not in warmth, but in menace. "You've been busy, boys," he said, his voice smooth as ice, and before Marcus could react, Langston fired, the shot cracking through the night, Julian's chest blooming red as he crumpled with a gasp. Marcus lunged, tackling Langston, the gun skittering across the tarmac, his fists pounding the traitor's face, blood and betrayal mingling in the dirt. Ruiz dove in, wrenching Marcus back as agents swarmed, cuffing Langston, his calm unshaken, despite the split lip Marcus gave him. Julian coughed blood, medics rushing to his side, his deep voice fading. "Victor, why?" Langston's eyes glinted, a predator unmasked, as he spat through crimson teeth. "You think Grayson was the top? I built this, Julian, every quota, every dollar, every judge. You were my pawn until you turned." Marcus's world tilted, the architect's mind reeling as Langston's confession spilled. A shadow empire dwarfing Holt's, Grayson's, a puppet master pulling strings from DC's heart. The feds dragged him off, but Langston twisted, locking eyes with Marcus. "This isn't over," he vowed, his voice a promise of vengeance as he vanished into custody. The airfield spun, medics stabilizing Julian as Marcus knelt beside him, his brother's pulse weak but holding, the betrayal a knife in his gut. Ruiz's voice cut through, grim and urgent. "He's flipped the script," Langston's crew framed. "You for this shooting, Marcus. Another manhunt's brewing." The chopper overhead swung back, its feed shifting. Marcus Tate shoots Attorney General in airfield chaos. The lie hit harder than Grayson's alert. Langston's final blow, turning Marcus from hero to hunted again, his victory a pyre as Julian bled out. The feds cleared him, Grayson's tape and files undeniable. But Langston's reach stretched beyond bars, his allies spinning a new web to bury Marcus deeper than Holt ever could. Marcus stood, blood dripping from his shoulder, his side, his fists, the borrowed vest a shroud as he watched Julian stretchered away, alive but broken. The empire was down, Holt's precinct dust, Grayson's network gutted, arrests sweeping the nation. But Langston's twist left Marcus a marked man, the real war dawning in the XAG's cold vow. Naomi's voice crackled through Ruiz's radio. Panicked, "Marcus, they're coming for you again." He nodded, his jaw tight, the architect plotting through the ruin as drones circled anew, the manhunt reborn. Langston's betrayal flipped the world. Justice a half-win shadowed by a deadlier foe. And Marcus knew this was no end, but a beginning, a fight he'd wage from the shadows. The airfield faded as feds hustled him to a van, Ruiz's team a shield. Against the storm Langston unleashed. Grayson's confession had shattered the machine, Holt's rats squealing, Pruitt's lies exposed, but Langston's shot and frame-up were a masterstroke, a new empire rising from the ashes. Julian's blood stained Marcus's hands, a brother's life spared, but a mentor's treachery branding him anew. The public rioted for justice, the files burned bright, but Langston's vow echoed, a specter of power unbroken by cuffs. Marcus's hazel eyes hardened, the architect's mind bending to this war, his family safe, but his name a curse again. He'd torn down one beast, only to wake a bigger one, and as the van rolled into the night, he braced for the hunt, a marked man with a truth too loud to silence. How long could he fight when the shadows held masters darker than Holt, their wrath a tide he'd only begun to stem? Marcus Tate's harrowing journey through Harrow Pines unveils brutal truths about systemic corruption and racial injustice that echo far beyond this racist story. The first lesson is resilience. Marcus faced wrongful arrests, beatings, and frame-ups, yet his unbreakable spirit turned every blow into a weapon, proving that strength lies in refusing to bow. When cops planted drugs, staged riots, and torched his home, he fought back with cunning and grit, showing that survival demands more than endurance, it requires strategy. Second, the power of truth can topple empires. Exposing Sheriff Holt's racket and Senator Grayson's prison network through Julian's federal might and Lena's whistleblowing sparked a public reckoning, reminding us that shining light on darkness, no matter the cost, can shift the tide. Third, trust is a double-edged sword. Langston's betrayal, shooting Julian and framing Marcus, reveals how even allies can hide venom, a stark warning to question those closest to power. Finally, justice is a war, not a win. Marcus dismantled one machine only to face a deadlier foe, proving that systemic racism doesn't die easy. It morphs, strikes back, and demands relentless battle. This racist story isn't just Marcus's. It's a mirror to real-world struggles where prejudice fuels profit and innocence is a target. It teaches us to stand tall, speak loud, and fight. Smart because silence lets the machine grind on. So what's your takeaway? How would you face a system rigged against you, fold under pressure, or rise like Marcus? Drop number 1 in the comments if you'd fight back. Hit like if this racist story fired you up. And subscribe for more tales of justice clashing with corruption. Share this with anyone who needs to see the truth laid bare. Thanks for joining this wild ride. Here's to courage outlasting chaos, and may you always find light in the darkest fights.